"Who touched you?" said the millionaire. Minutes later, the whole city knew she wasn't just his maid. Sophia moved through the expansive hallways of the Hamilton estate, her cleaning cloth gliding over the polished mahogany shelves that lined the walls. Ornate vases and priceless artifacts caught the late morning sun streaming through tall windows, making her task of dusting feel more like handling precious museum pieces than simple household chores. She paused at a particularly beautiful crystal figurine, carefully lifting it to clean underneath. The delicate angel caught the light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the cream-colored walls. For a moment, Sophia's mind drifted to her small apartment across town, where her few possessions could fit in a single box. No crystal angels there, just a few cherished photos and her mother's old recipe book. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock echoed through the empty corridor, reminding her of the vast difference between her world and this one. Each room she cleaned was bigger than her entire living space, filled with more luxury than she'd seen in her whole life. "At least the quiet is nice," she whispered to herself, moving on to dust a collection of leather-bound books. The mansion felt peaceful during these morning hours, before Mr. Hamilton emerged from his study to begin his day. Working here had given her a glimpse into a life she'd only seen in movies, though sometimes the grandeur felt hollow, empty somehow. As she worked her way down the hall, Sophia's thoughts wandered to her dreams of going back to school. Each paycheck brought her a little closer to having enough saved for community college courses. Maybe then she could... The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Alexander Hamilton appeared at the end of the hallway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. His presence always seemed to fill whatever space he occupied, commanding attention without effort. Today he looked particularly tired, dark circles visible under his eyes. "Mr. Hamilton," Sophia said softly, stepping aside to let him pass. "Would you like some water? You look like you could use some refreshment." He gave a curt nod, running a hand through his dark hair. "Yes, thank you." Sophia hurried to the kitchen, filling a crystal glass with filtered water and a slice of lemon, just as he preferred. She found him in the sitting room, standing by the window with his back to the door. Sunlight outlined his figure, highlighting the expensive cut of his suit. "Your water, sir," she said, approaching carefully. As she extended the glass, her hand accidentally brushed against his shoulder. The effect was immediate and startling. Alexander's entire body tensed, and he whirled around to face her. The glass wobbled in her hand, but she managed to keep it steady. His eyes, usually a warm brown, had turned cold and hard. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp with accusation. I was just bringing your water," Sophia stammered, taken aback by his sudden change in demeanor. "Is that all?" His jaw clenched tight. "Or were you trying to get close enough to take something, perhaps checking my pockets?" The crystal glass trembled in Sophia's hand as Alexander's words hit her like physical blows. His face had transformed into a mask of suspicion and anger, all trace of his usual composed demeanor gone. The glass of water shook in Sophia's hand, drops spilling onto the polished hardwood floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she struggled to process Alexander's accusation. After 6 months of working in his home, treating every object with utmost care and respect, his words felt like a slap across her face. "Mr. Hamilton," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "I would never steal from you. Never." She set the glass down on a nearby table before her shaking hands could drop it. Alexander's eyes tracked her movement, his posture rigid and defensive. That's what they all say, isn't it? Right until the moment they're caught. "They?" Sophia felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm not they, Mr. Hamilton. I'm me. I'm the person who's been here every day, taking care of your home, making sure everything is exactly as you like it. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I'm the one who remembers you prefer lemon in your water, who makes sure your newspapers are arranged by section every morning, who noticed when you were sick last month and made you chicken soup. He paced the room like a caged animal, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. Pretty words, such attention to detail, or maybe you've just been watching, waiting, learning my routines. That's not fair, Sophia protested, fighting back tears. I've given you no reason to doubt me. I've been nothing but loyal. Loyal? Alexander spun around, his face contorted with bitter humor. Do you know how many loyal people I've had in my life? Do you have any idea what that word means to me? The pain in his voice caught Sophia off guard. There was something raw there, something that went deeper than simple suspicion. They all start the same way, he continued, running a hand through his hair. They come into my life, learn my habits, gain my trust, like Caroline did. His voice cracked on the name. I don't know who Caroline is, Sophia said softly, but I'm not her. No? Alexander's laugh was harsh. She worked here too, you know, for 2 years. Made everything perfect, just like you do. Knew exactly how I liked things, just like you do. And then one day, I found out she'd been photographing my personal documents, selling information to my family's competitors. Understanding began to dawn on Sophia. Mr. Hamilton, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but... But what? He snapped, his voice rising. But you're different. But you would never do that? Do you know how much those words mean to me now? Nothing. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the water glass jump. You can't punish me for someone else's actions. Sophia felt her own anger rising now, mixing with hurt and frustration. I'm not your enemy, Mr. Hamilton. I'm just trying to do my job, the job you hired me to do. The job that gives you access to every room in my house, every private space in my life? His eyes blazed with a mixture of anger and what looked almost like fear. How convenient. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite the warm sunlight streaming through the windows. How had a simple touch, an accidental brush of contact, spiraled into this? The man before her seemed like a stranger, nothing like the quiet, controlled employer she'd known for the past 6 months. Mr. Hamilton, she tried one more time, her voice quiet but steady. Whatever happened to you in the past, whatever pain you're carrying, you're wrong about me, completely wrong. Alexander's shoulders slumped slightly, and he turned to face the large window overlooking his manicured gardens. The sunlight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw. You don't understand what it's like, he said, his voice quieter now but still strained. Growing up knowing that every person who smiles at you might have an ulterior motive, every friendship, every relationship, it all comes with a price tag. Sophia remained silent, watching as he absently traced patterns on the window pane with his finger. The Hamilton fortune, he continued, almost speaking to himself. 3 generations of careful investments, business empires, and old money, and I'm the sole heir. He turned back to face her, his eyes heavy with unspoken burden. Do you know what that means? I had no idea, Sophia admitted softly. The magnificent house suddenly made more sense. It wasn't just wealth, it was generational power. Of course you didn't. That's the point. Alexander moved to sit in a nearby armchair, his usual perfect posture giving way to exhaustion. My family kept me hidden from the public eye. Private schools, secured compounds, controlled social circles, all to protect me from people who might try to use me to get to the fortune. That sounds lonely, Sophia ventured, still standing where she was. A bitter smile crossed his face. Lonely? Yes, but also necessary. When I was 16, my first girlfriend sold stories about me to the tabloids. At 20, my college roommate tried to blackmail my family. After Caroline, he trailed off, shaking his head. The silence stretched between them, heavy with revelation. Sophia's anger from earlier began to fade, replaced by a growing understanding of the man before her. "The truth is," Alexander said, looking directly at her for the first time since his outburst, "I didn't really think you were stealing from me." Sophia blinked in surprise. "What?" "It was a test." He ran his hands over his face, suddenly looking ashamed. "When you touched my shoulder, it was the first genuine human contact I'd had in months. It scared me. So I needed to see how you'd react under pressure, to see if you'd break character." "Character?" Sophia felt her throat tighten. "You think this is a character I'm playing?" "I don't know what to think anymore," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I live in constant fear of people getting close to me. Every time someone shows kindness, I wonder what they want. Every time someone touches me, I brace for betrayal." The vulnerability in his confession struck Sophia deeply. The powerful, controlled man she'd known these past months suddenly seemed so human, so wounded. "I'm sorry," he said, looking down at his hands. "The accusation, the anger, it was unfair to you. He swallowed hard. "I don't know how to trust anymore, and that terrifies me." Sophia watched as Alexander's carefully constructed walls crumbled before her eyes. His admission of fear, his test, even his earlier anger, it all stemmed from a lifetime of learned distrust. Despite her lingering hurt from his accusations, she felt her heart ache for the lonely boy who had grown into this guarded man. The sunlight continued to stream through the windows, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. What had started as a confrontation had transformed into something else entirely. A rare moment of genuine vulnerability from a man who had spent his entire life keeping people at arm's length. The afternoon light softened as clouds drifted across the sun, casting gentle shadows throughout the room. Sophia shifted her weight from one foot to the other, processing everything Alexander had just revealed. The silence between them felt different now. Less hostile, more contemplative. "Would you like some tea?" she asked quietly, falling back on the familiar routine of her duties to break the tension. Alexander looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "You're still willing to make me tea? After how I just treated you?" "It's what I do," she said simply, but then added, "And maybe we both need a moment to think." He nodded slowly. "Yes, tea would be nice." Sophia moved to the kitchen, grateful for the brief respite. As she prepared the tea, her mind whirled with everything she'd learned. The mansion's grandeur, Alexander's careful distance, his intense privacy. It all made sense now. She carried the tea tray back to find him standing by the window again, his posture less rigid than before. "I usually take my tea here alone," he said as she set down the tray. "Every day, same time, same spot." He turned to look at her. "But would you join me?" Sophia hesitated, then settled into one of the plush chairs. Alexander sat across from her, his movements careful and measured. "I've never told anyone about my situation so directly before," he admitted, watching as she poured the tea. "My family has protocols, procedures for revealing information. Everything is carefully controlled." "It sounds exhausting," Sophia said, passing him his cup. "Living with that much calculation." "It is." He stared into his tea. "But it's also all I've known. Sometimes I watch people outside these walls, just living their normal lives, and I wonder—" He trailed off, lost in thought. "What it would be like to be free," Sophia suggested softly. Alexander's eyes met hers, a flash of recognition passing between them. Yes, exactly that. I might not understand what it's like to have your wealth, Sophia said, cradling her teacup. But I know something about feeling trapped. Before I started working here, I was stuck in a cycle of dead-end jobs, barely making ends meet. Everyone around me seemed to be moving forward while I stayed in place. At least you had the freedom to choose, Alexander said, but his tone wasn't bitter, just stating a fact. Different kinds of cages, she replied, but cages nonetheless. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their tea. The late afternoon sun had emerged again, warming the room. I truly am sorry, Alexander said suddenly, setting down his cup. About earlier, the accusation, the anger, it was unfair. When you touched my shoulder, it felt real, genuine, and that scared me more than any threat of theft ever could. Sophia felt her chest tighten at his honesty. Why did it scare you? Because, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, genuine connections are dangerous in my world. They can't be controlled or predicted. They can't be managed by lawyers or protected by security systems. He looked down at his hands. And every time I've allowed myself to trust, to feel, it's ended badly. Not everyone wants something from you, Alexander, Sophia said gently. He looked up at her, his eyes vulnerable yet hopeful. I'm starting to realize that. It's not easy to unlearn a lifetime of suspicion. The honesty in his voice touched something in Sophia. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, she recognized the loneliness in his words. The same loneliness she'd felt during countless solitary evenings in her small apartment, wondering if there was more to life than just surviving. The days following their heart-to-heart conversation drifted by in a gentle haze. Sophia found herself paying closer attention to Alexander's habits. The way he drummed his fingers on his desk when deep in thought. How he always straightened his already perfect tie before important phone calls. The slight softening around his eyes when he said good morning. During her cleaning routine, she caught herself lingering in rooms where he worked. Even the simplest interactions, passing him a document he'd dropped or refreshing his coffee, felt charged with new meaning. The initial tension had transformed into something else, something that made her pulse quicken whenever their eyes met. But these feelings confused her. He was her employer, after all, and from a completely different world. She'd dust the countless awards and certificates on his walls, each one a reminder of the vast gap between their lives. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of his vulnerability during their tea conversation, the way he'd opened up to her. One evening, as Sophia finished organizing the library, a task that usually took half the time, but she'd found herself distracted by reading the titles of his books. Alexander appeared in the doorway. The setting sun cast long shadows through the tall windows, giving the room a warm, intimate feel. I noticed you've been spending more time in here, he said, his voice softer than usual. Sophia felt her cheeks warm. I'm sorry if I've been slow with my duties. No, that's not... Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. I was actually wondering if you'd join me for dinner. Nothing formal, he added quickly. Just... dinner. The invitation hung in the air between them. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. I'd like that, she said finally. They settled in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, which surprised her. Alexander had insisted on helping her prepare a simple pasta dish, though his culinary skills proved to be endearingly amateur. I've never actually cooked before, he admitted, watching her demonstrate how to properly chop garlic. We always had staff for that. Never? Sophia asked, hiding a smile as he cautiously mimicked her movements. What about in college? I had a private suite. He looked slightly embarrassed. My family thought it would be safer. As they worked side by side, their conversation flowed more easily than ever before. Alexander told her about his childhood, about growing up in various secured compounds, always surrounded by guards and tutors, but rarely by friends. Sophia shared stories about her own upbringing. The cramped apartment she'd shared with her mother, the community garden where they'd grown vegetables to save money, the satisfaction of earning her first paycheck. "It sounds like you had something I never did," Alexander said thoughtfully as they sat down to eat. "Freedom to make your own mistakes." "And my own successes," Sophia added, "though they might seem small compared to yours." "No," he said quickly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "Don't diminish your achievements. Sometimes I think you're braver than I am. Everything I have was handed to me, but everything you have, you earned." The honesty in his voice made something flutter in Sophia's chest. She watched as he took his first bite of their jointly prepared meal, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. In that moment, he wasn't the wealthy heir or her guarded employer. He was just Alexander, a man sharing a simple dinner with her in a warm kitchen, their knees almost touching under the table. Neither of them mentioned the growing warmth between them, the way their hands had brushed while cooking, or how their eyes kept finding each other in the soft evening light. But Sophia could feel it, this delicate new thing taking shape, as fragile and precious as a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patches of light across the breakfast table. Sophia had arrived earlier than usual, wanting to prepare a proper breakfast after their dinner together the previous evening. She found Alexander already seated at the kitchen counter, staring intently at his phone. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, his face tight with tension despite his attempt at a smile. "Morning." He set his phone down with deliberate care, as if it might bite him. "I hope you don't mind if I join you for breakfast?" "Of course not." Sophia busied herself with the coffee maker, sneaking glances at him. Something was clearly bothering him. "Toast?" "Please." He drummed his fingers on the counter, a nervous habit she'd noticed before. "My family called this morning. They're coming to visit next week." Sophia placed a mug of coffee in front of him, noting how his shoulders hunched slightly at the mention of his family. "Oh, how long will they be staying?" 3 days. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Though it'll feel like 3 years. They've already drafted an itinerary for every hour I'm awake." As Sophia prepared their breakfast, Alexander continued speaking, his words coming faster, more agitated. "They've scheduled meetings with potential business partners, arranged dinners with suitable people from their social circle, and planned a charity gala that I'm apparently hosting, though this is the first I'm hearing about it." The toast popped up, making them both jump. Sophia buttered it quietly, listening as Alexander's frustrations poured out. "I'm 32 years old, and they still treat me like I'm incapable of making my own decisions." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up its usual perfect styling. "Every aspect of my life has to be vetted and approved. The house I live in, the car I drive, the people I'm allowed to associate with, it's all carefully controlled." Sophia placed a plate in front of him, her heart aching at the defeat in his voice. "Have you ever tried to stand up to them?" "Once." He gave a bitter laugh. "When I was 25, I wanted to start my own company instead of joining the family business. They froze my accounts, canceled my credit cards, and threatened to cut off anyone who tried to help me." He picked up his fork, but just pushed the eggs around his plate. "They said it was for my own protection, that I didn't understand how the real world worked." The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet ticking of the clock. Sophia sat down beside him, close enough to offer support, but not so close as to make him uncomfortable. "That must have been really hard." "The worst part is," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "they'll arrive with their usual list of suitable women they want me to meet, daughters of their friends, business associates, all perfectly vetted, all with the right background and connections. His knuckles turned white around his coffee mug. They don't care if I'm happy. They just want to ensure the family legacy continues according to their plan. Watching him struggle with his emotions, Sophia felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. She wanted to shield him from his family's manipulation, to help him find the strength to live life on his own terms. But she knew this wasn't something she could fix with kind words or a warm breakfast. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, pushing his barely touched plate away. "I shouldn't be dumping all of this on you. It's not your problem." "Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter," Sophia said quietly, resisting the urge to reach for his hand. His eyes met hers, filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper she couldn't quite name. The morning sun caught the tension in his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands as he gripped his coffee mug tighter, betraying the storm of anxiety building within him about the upcoming visit. The sound of expensive tires crunching on gravel announced their arrival. Sophia watched from the kitchen window as 3 sleek black cars pulled up to the mansion's entrance. The drivers emerged in perfect synchronization, opening doors for their passengers with practiced precision. First came Alexander's father, Richard Wellington III, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes that seemed to assess everything in terms of monetary value. His mother, Victoria, followed, her designer outfit probably worth more than Sophia's yearly salary. Last came his sister, Charlotte, who shared Alexander's dark hair but none of his warmth. Alexander stood at attention in the foyer, his entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the man who had shared breakfast with Sophia that morning, replaced by someone rigid and formal. Sophia hung back in the kitchen doorway, watching the reunion unfold. "Alexander, darling," Victoria air-kissed both his cheeks, leaving perfect lipstick impressions. "You look thin. Haven't you been eating properly?" Before he could answer, his father cut in. "The Thompson merger documents require your signature. I've scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning." "Father, I haven't even reviewed. It's all been handled by our legal team." Richard dismissed his concern with a wave. "Charlotte, show him the guest list for tonight's dinner." Charlotte produced a tablet, scrolling through names. "The Vandermeers are bringing their daughter, Emma. Harvard Law, impeccable family connections. Mother thinks you'll find her suitable." Sophia's heart ached as she watched Alexander's shoulders tense further. He caught her eye briefly, a flash of desperation crossing his face before his mask of compliance slipped back into place. The family swept through the house like a well-orchestrated storm, issuing commands and making changes. Victoria instructed the staff to rearrange furniture, while Richard commandeered Alexander's home office. Charlotte took over the dining room, coordinating with caterers for the evening's dinner party. Throughout the day, Sophia observed how they spoke about Alexander as if he weren't present, planning his life without consultation. "The Ashworth girl will be seated to your left," Victoria declared. "Her father's shipping company would make an excellent addition to our portfolio." The dinner party was an exercise in subtle manipulation. Sophia, relegated to helping the catering staff, watched as Alexander was positioned between 2 elegantly dressed young women. His parents orchestrated every conversation, steering topics toward business advantages and social connections. Later that night, after the guests had departed and his family had retired to their hotel, Sophia found Alexander in the kitchen. He sat in the dark, his tie loosened, looking utterly defeated. "They have my whole life mapped out," he said quietly as she approached. "The right wife from the right family, the right number of children, the right schools they'll attend." He laughed hollowly. "Did you hear them tonight? The Vandermeer girl comes from excellent stock. Like they're breeding racehorses." Sophia sat beside him, close enough to offer comfort but maintaining a respectful distance. "Can't you refuse? Everything I have, everything I am, is controlled by them. His voice cracked slightly. "The trust fund, the company shares, even this house. It's all contingent on following their plans. They expect me to marry someone who will strengthen the family empire, someone who understands our position in society." He spat the last words with bitter resignation. In the dim kitchen light, their eyes met. Sophia saw the same loneliness she'd felt in her own life, reflected in his gaze. Without words, they recognized in each other the shared weight of expectations and the deep desire for something real, something chosen rather than imposed. Chapter 8. Scene 1. The days following his family's visit brought subtle changes to the mansion's atmosphere. Alexander seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing his burden with Sophia had eased some of his tension. Their conversations, once limited to household matters, now stretched into hours. One afternoon, while Sophia arranged fresh flowers in the study, Alexander lingered nearby, pretending to read, but stealing glances at her over his book. "Those roses," he said softly. "They remind me of my grandmother's garden. She was the only one who ever let me just be myself." Sophia touched a velvet petal. "What was she like?" "Different from the rest of them. She taught me to play piano badly and laugh at myself." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "She would have liked you." Their casual chats became a daily ritual. During breakfast, Alexander would share stories from his childhood, the lonely holidays in boarding school, the pressure to excel at everything. Sophia, in turn, told him about growing up in a small town, about helping in her father's bakery before it closed down. One evening, they sat in the kitchen sharing leftover pasta. Alexander had loosened his tie, and Sophia had kicked off her shoes. The formality that usually filled the mansion had melted away. "I never expected this," Alexander admitted, twirling pasta on his fork. "Having someone to really talk to." "What did you expect?" "The usual. People who smile and nod, agreeing with everything I say because of my last name." He set down his fork. "But you called me out when I accused you of stealing. You stood your ground." Sophia smiled, remembering their first heated encounter. "You were being ridiculous." "I was," he agreed, chuckling. "But it was refreshing. Real." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Alexander's smile faded into something more serious, more vulnerable. "Sophia," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something, but I'm not sure how." She waited, her heart beating faster as he struggled with his words. "These past few days, spending time with you?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd come to recognize. "I never thought I could feel this way about someone, especially someone who—" He trailed off, looking away. "Someone who what?" Sophia prompted gently. "Someone who sees me for who I am, not what I'm worth." His voice trembled slightly. "I'm falling for you, Sophia, and it terrifies me because why would someone like you want someone like me? Someone so broken, so controlled by his family? Someone who couldn't even trust you at first?" The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Alexander's hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white with tension. He looked more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him, stripped of his usual composed facade. "I know this is inappropriate," he continued, his words rushing out now. "You work for me, and I have no right to put you in this position. But I can't pretend anymore. I can't act like every moment with you isn't the highlight of my day." He finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "I've never felt so terrified of losing something I don't even have." The mansion felt unusually quiet that evening. Earlier, Alexander's family had stormed out after another heated argument about his future. Now he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room, his silhouette dark against the setting sun. Sophia watched him from the doorway, noting how his shoulders slumped under the weight of his family's expectations. They want me to marry Elizabeth Bradford, he said without turning around. His voice was hollow. The merger would be perfect, they said, as if my heart doesn't matter at all. Sophia stepped into the room, her footsteps soft on the plush carpet. What did you tell them? I told them no. He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. For the first time in my life, I stood up to them, because... He swallowed hard, taking a shaky breath. Because my heart belongs to someone else. The air between them grew thick with tension. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. I'm in love with you, Sophia. The words tumbled out, raw and honest. I've tried to fight it, to deny it, but I can't anymore. Every morning I wake up thinking about you. Every night I go to bed wondering if you could ever feel the same way. Sophia stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, she found herself overwhelmed by the reality of it. I know it's complicated, Alexander continued, running a hand through his hair. I'm your employer and my family. They'll make things difficult, but I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than love. His voice cracked on the last word. You make me want to be better, to be braver. When I'm with you, I feel like myself for the first time in my life. He took a tentative step toward her, then stopped, as if afraid to come closer. I understand if you don't feel the same way. If you want to leave, I'll make sure you're taken care of. But I had to tell you. I couldn't bear the thought of you never knowing how much you mean to me. Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes. All the feelings she'd been holding back, all the moments she'd caught herself staring at him, all the times her heart had skipped a beat when he smiled. They came rushing to the surface. Alexander, she whispered, her voice trembling. I've been falling in love with you too. The admission felt like releasing a breath she'd been holding for too long. Every day, watching you struggle with your family's expectations, seeing how hard you try to be true to yourself, how could I not fall in love with you? She crossed the space between them, reaching up to touch his face. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, and she felt him lean into her touch. I love how you hum when you read, how you always remember how I take my coffee, how your eyes light up when you talk about your grandmother's garden. Alexander's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. Sophia, he breathed, his voice filled with wonder. My beautiful, brave Sophia. His forehead rested against hers, and they stood there, sharing the same air, their hearts beating in sync. I love you, she whispered again, because now that she'd said it once, she never wanted to stop. With all my heart. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times as Alexander and Sophia sat together on the plush sofa in his study. Their fingers were intertwined, and the warmth of their recent confessions still lingered in the air. Through the window, city lights twinkled like fallen stars, a reminder of the world that seemed to press in on them from all sides. I can't keep living like this, Alexander said softly, his thumb tracing circles on Sophia's palm. Every decision, every move I make, they're watching, waiting to correct my course if I stray from their plans. Sophia squeezed his hand. What do you want, Alexander? Not what your family wants? What do you want? He turned to face her, his eyes bright with sudden clarity. I want a life with you, a simple life, where we can just be ourselves. His voice grew stronger with each word. I don't need all this. He gestured at the ornate room around them. The mansion, the family legacy, the business empire, none of it matters if I'm not happy. Where would we go? Sophia asked, allowing herself to imagine a future free from the shadow of his family's expectations. I have a small cottage in Vermont, Alexander revealed. My grandmother left it to me secretly, knowing I might need an escape someday. It's nothing like this place, just a simple house with a garden and a view of the mountains. Sophia's eyes lit up. Tell me more about it. It's peaceful there. The nearest neighbor is half a mile away. There's a small town nearby where everyone knows each other by name. He smiled, lost in memories. The garden needs work, but I remember helping my grandmother tend to her roses there when I was young. It was the only place I ever felt truly free. It sounds perfect, Sophia whispered, imagining quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, far from the pressures of city life and family obligations. Alexander stood up and began pacing, his energy building as he spoke. We could leave next week. I have some money set aside that my family doesn't know about. The cottage is already furnished, and there's enough land to start a small business if we wanted to. What about your family? Sophia asked gently. They'll try to stop us. Alexander's jaw set firmly. They can't control me forever. I'm 32 years old, and it's time I lived my own life. He returned to sit beside her, taking both her hands in his. But I need to know if this is what you want too. I know it's asking a lot, leaving everything behind, starting over. Sophia thought about her small apartment, her few possessions, the life she'd built for herself. I don't have much to leave behind, she said honestly. And what I'd gain? She smiled at him. A chance at real happiness with you? That's worth any risk. They spent the next hour planning their departure. Alexander would quietly transfer funds and prepare the cottage, while Sophia would gradually pack her essential belongings. They decided to leave early next Thursday morning, before dawn, when the city was still sleeping. We'll drive up the coast first, Alexander said, his eyes shining with excitement. Then cut inland toward Vermont. By the time anyone realizes we're gone, we'll be too far away to stop. Sophia leaned against him, feeling lighter than she had in years. Promise me something? Anything. Promise me we'll plant those roses in the garden. A fresh start deserves something beautiful to grow with it. Alexander kissed her forehead softly. I promise. We'll build something beautiful together, something that's entirely our own. The morning sun filtered through the study's heavy curtains as Alexander sat at his desk, reviewing documents for the day. His phone buzzed, displaying his mother's number. He stared at it for several seconds before answering with a resigned sigh. Alexander, darling, his mother's crisp voice came through. The board meeting has been moved up. We need you here today at 2 o'clock. He frowned, checking his watch. Mother, I have other commitments. Cancel them, she interrupted. This is about your future, dear. We've finally arranged everything with the Blackwoods. Their daughter Caroline is perfect for you, Harvard-educated, from an excellent family. The merger will be seamless. Alexander's stomach tightened. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, taken just yesterday. Sophia smiling in the garden, unaware he was photographing her. Mother, I've told you before, I'm not interested in... Enough. His mother's voice turned sharp. This isn't about what you want. The family needs this merger, and Caroline is exactly what you need. Your father has already drawn up the preliminary agreements. The weight of generations of expectations pressed down on Alexander's shoulders. He loosened his tie, feeling suffocated. You can't just arrange my life like this. We can, and we will. Her tone softened slightly. Darling, we only want what's best for you. You'll learn to love her. She's beautiful, accomplished, and understands our world. Unlike, she paused meaningfully, certain other people who might catch your eye. Alexander's jaw clenched. They knew about Sophia. Of course they did. I'll be there at 2, he said flatly, hanging up before his mother could respond. He stood by the window, watching the gardener trim the hedges below. Everything looked so ordered, so controlled, just like his life. The phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Sophia. Looking forward to lunch today. His fingers hovered over the keys. but he couldn't bring himself to respond. The plans they'd made last night suddenly seemed childish, impossible. How could he walk away from everything? The family legacy, the responsibility, the expectations that had been drilled into him since birth. When Sophia knocked on his study door an hour later, he pretended not to hear. She tried again, her voice muffled through the thick wood. "Alexander, are you okay?" "I'm busy," he called back, hating himself for the coldness in his voice. "I have meetings all afternoon. I'll talk to you later." There was a long pause. "All right," she finally said, her voice small and uncertain. He listened to her footsteps fade away, each one feeling like a physical pain in his chest. Alexander slumped in his chair, running his hands through his hair. The cottage in Vermont seemed like a distant dream now, fading in the harsh light of reality. His family would never let him go. They'd find him, drag him back, destroy Sophia's reputation in the process. He pulled out the photo of Sophia from his desk drawer, tracing her smile with his finger. The happiness they'd shared yesterday felt like it belonged to someone else, someone braver, someone free. With trembling hands, he placed the photo face down in the drawer and closed it. At 1:30, he straightened his tie and prepared to leave for the board meeting. Each step toward his car felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the choice he couldn't seem to make, the life he wanted versus the life that had been chosen for him. Sophia paced in her small room at the back of the mansion, Alexander's cold dismissal echoing in her mind. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, matching her darkening mood. Something had changed. She could feel it in the way he'd shut her out, in the silence that followed her messages. After hours of internal debate, she squared her shoulders and made her way to his study. This time she wouldn't let him hide behind closed doors, her knuckles rapped firmly against the wooden panel. "Alexander, we need to talk." Her voice carried more strength than she felt. There was rustling inside, followed by footsteps. The door opened slowly, revealing Alexander in his perfectly pressed suit, looking exhausted. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his usually neat hair was disheveled from running his hands through it. "Sophia, He stepped back, allowing her to enter. The study felt different now, colder, more formal than during their intimate conversations of the past few days. She moved to the center of the room, turning to face him. "What happened today? 1 minute we're planning our future, and the next, you're shutting me out completely." Alexander leaned against his desk, his fingers gripping the edge. "My family called. They've arranged things." "What kind of things?" Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. "A merger, through marriage." The words fell heavily between them. "They've chosen someone they think is suitable." Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. "And what about our plans? The cottage in Vermont? Everything we talked about?" "It's complicated," he said, his voice strained. "My family's expectations, the business, our reputation, it's all intertwined." "It's only complicated because you're making it complicated." Sophia stepped closer. "Yesterday you were ready to leave all of this behind. You said you wanted a real life, not this golden cage they've built for you." Alexander's face contorted with emotion. "I did say that. I meant it when I said it, but what?" Sophia pressed, her voice softening. "Alexander, are you truly ready to leave this life behind? To choose something different, something real?" He pushed away from the desk, pacing to the window. The garden below was bathed in late afternoon light, perfect and manicured, just like everything else in his world. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was ready, but today, when reality hit..." He turned to face her, his eyes troubled. "My entire life has been mapped out since before I was born. Every decision, every move calculated. The thought of walking away from it all, it's terrifying. Sophia felt tears pricking at her eyes. More terrifying than losing what we have? Sophia. He moved toward her, then stopped himself. I need time. Time to think, to figure out what I really want, what I'm capable of doing. Time? The word tasted bitter in her mouth. While your family arranges your marriage to someone else? Alexander ran a hand over his face. I need to be sure about everything. This isn't just about us. There are consequences I need to consider. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon. How much time? I don't know, he said quietly. I just know I can't make this decision right now. It's too much. The space between them seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with unspoken words and uncertain promises. Sophia nodded slowly, her heart heavy. All right, she said, moving toward the door. Take your time, Alexander, but remember, sometimes waiting too long to make a choice is making a choice in itself. The morning light barely filtered through the heavy curtains of the mansion's formal living room as Alexander's family filed in, their expensive shoes clicking against the marble floors. His mother, Elizabeth, settled gracefully onto an antique settee, while his father, Richard, remained standing, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the room. Alexander stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, knuckles white with tension. The air felt thick with unspoken demands and expectations. Son, Richard began, his voice carrying the weight of generations of wealth and privilege. We've been more than patient with your recent behavior. He adjusted his gold cufflinks, a nervous habit Alexander had noticed since childhood. But the time has come for you to face your responsibilities. Elizabeth smoothed her silk dress, her perfectly manicured nails catching the light. We've arranged everything, darling. Carolyn Rochester is from an excellent family. The merger between our companies would secure both our futures. Alexander's chest tightened. He could feel the walls of his carefully constructed world closing in. And if I refuse? His father's expression hardened. Then you leave us no choice. Richard moved closer, his presence overwhelming. Either you fulfill your duty to this family by marrying Caroline, or you will be cut off. Completely. You can't be serious. Alexander's voice cracked slightly. We're deadly serious, his mother interjected, her tone sharp despite her soft smile. No more access to family funds, no position in the company, no inheritance. You'll be entirely on your own. Alexander's mind raced to Sophia, to their plans, to the simple life they'd dreamed of building together. But the weight of his family's legacy pressed down on him like a physical force. The wedding has been tentatively scheduled for next month, his father continued. The Rochesters are eager to proceed. Carolyn is a suitable match, educated, refined, from our world. Our world, Alexander repeated quietly, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. Elizabeth rose, approaching her son with calculated grace. Darling, this isn't about love. It's about duty, about preserving what generations before us have built. She touched his arm lightly. That household maid you've been spending time with. She was a pleasant distraction, I'm sure, but surely you understand she could never truly be part of our world. Alexander flinched at the dismissive way they spoke about Sophia, but found himself unable to defend her, to defend their relationship. The courage he'd felt when planning their escape seemed to evaporate under his parents' scrutiny. We expect your answer by tomorrow morning, Richard declared, checking his watch. Though I hardly think there's much to consider. You know what needs to be done. They left him standing there, the echo of their footsteps fading down the hallway. Alexander remained frozen, his mind a chaos of conflicting emotions. The family portrait above the fireplace seemed to mock him, generations of stern faces reminding him of his place, his duty. Later that evening, he heard Sophia's soft knock at his study door, but couldn't bring himself to answer. He paced the room instead, his father's ultimatum playing on repeat in his mind. The thought of leaving everything behind, his family, his security, his entire identity, paralyzed him with fear. He poured himself a drink, then another, trying to drown out the voice in his head that kept asking what he truly wanted. As night fell, he remained alone in his study, the darkness matching his troubled thoughts, the weight of his family's expectations crushing any dreams of a different life. Sophia stood in her small room at the back of the mansion, folding her modest collection of clothes with trembling hands. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her bed, where an open suitcase lay waiting. Each piece she packed felt heavier than the last, weighted down by memories of stolen glances and whispered promises. She picked up her favorite sweater, the one she'd worn during their first real conversation after his accusation. The soft blue fabric still held the scent of the mansion's library, where they'd spent countless evenings talking about their dreams. With a shaky breath, she folded it and placed it in the suitcase. "This is the right thing to do," she whispered to herself, wiping away a stray tear. The past few days of Alexander's silence had spoken volumes. Every time she'd passed him in the hallway, he'd turned away, unable to meet her eyes. The warmth that had grown between them had frozen over, replaced by a painful distance that cut deeper than any words could. Moving to her small dresser, Sophia gathered her few personal items: a worn photo of her parents, a silver hairbrush she'd saved months to buy, and a small ceramic bird Alexander had given her after their first dinner together. She wrapped the bird carefully in one of her scarves, her fingers lingering on its delicate wings. The mansion's quiet halls seemed to mock her as she collected her things from the bathroom. Everything was exactly as it had always been: pristine, perfect, unchanged. But for Sophia, nothing would ever be the same. The dreams she'd allowed herself to believe in, of a life with Alexander away from all this grandeur, now felt like a cruel fairy tale. At her small writing desk, Sophia pulled out a sheet of paper. The expensive stationery, another gift from Alexander, felt smooth under her fingertips. She picked up her pen and began to write, her heart pouring onto the page. "Dear Alexander, I understand now what an impossible position you're in. The weight of your family's expectations, the life you've always known. I see how hard it is for you to consider leaving it all behind. I never wanted to be the reason you lost everything. These past months have shown me a side of you that I believe few people get to see. The real you, beneath all the walls you've built. I've fallen in love with that person, the man who dreams of breaking free, who longs for something real and true. But I can't be the one to make this choice for you. It has to be your decision, and yours alone. I'm giving you the space to figure out what you truly want. But I need you to understand that I can't put my life on hold forever. I deserve someone who chooses me without hesitation, just as you deserve to live the life that makes you truly happy. Whatever that may be. If you decide that life includes me, you know where to find me. I'll be staying with my sister in the city. With love, Sophia." She folded the letter carefully, slipping it into an envelope. Her hands shook as she wrote his name on the front. Standing in the middle of her room, Sophia took one last look around. The space that had been her home for the past year now felt like a beautiful prison, filled with memories she'd have to learn to live without. Picking up her suitcase and shouldering her bag, she walked quietly through the mansion's halls. She placed the letter on the small table in the foyer where Alexander always left his keys. The envelope looked stark against the dark wood. Impossible to miss. Chapter 15. The Cost of Hesitation. Alexander's footsteps echoed through the marble foyer as he returned from another tense family meeting. His shoulders felt heavy with the weight of expectations and ultimatums. The usual warmth that greeted him when he came home, Sophia's subtle presence that somehow made the massive mansion feel like a real home, was noticeably absent. "Sophia," he called out, his voice bouncing off the cold walls. Only silence answered. The mansion felt different, emptier, colder. As he placed his keys on the small table in the foyer, his eyes caught the envelope. His name was written in Sophia's neat handwriting, the sight of it making his heart skip a beat. With trembling fingers he picked it up, already dreading what he'd find inside. As he read her words, each sentence felt like a knife twisting in his chest. The paper shook in his hands, and he had to lean against the wall for support. Her gentle understanding of his situation only made it worse. There was no anger, no blame, just a sad acceptance that cut deeper than any accusation could have. "No, no, no," he whispered, reading the letter again. The reality of her absence hit him like a physical blow. He rushed through the mansion, taking the familiar path to her quarters, his footsteps quickening with each stride. The door to her room stood slightly ajar. Alexander pushed it open, his breath catching in his throat. The small space that had always felt so alive with Sophia's presence was now stark and empty. The few personal touches she'd added over the past year were gone. The colorful throw pillow she'd brought from home, the small vase of wildflowers she always kept on the windowsill, the stack of worn paperback novels on her nightstand. He sat heavily on her bed, the letter still clutched in his hand. The room smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, a scent that had become so familiar he'd stopped noticing it until now, when its source was gone. His mind wandered to all the moments they'd shared, all the times she'd made him laugh, all the quiet conversations that had helped him feel less alone. Alexander moved to the window, staring out at the manicured gardens below. How many times had he watched her walking there, tending to the flowers with a care and attention that spoke of her gentle nature. The gardens seemed duller now, as if they too felt her absence. The magnitude of what he'd lost began to sink in. Sophia hadn't just been his employee, or even just someone he'd fallen in love with. She'd been the first person to see him for who he really was, to care about Alexander the person rather than Alexander the heir. She'd brought warmth and life to this cold mansion, had made him feel truly at home for the first time in his life. And he'd let her go. His family's voices echoed in his head, their demands and expectations mixing with memories of Sophia's gentle encouragement and understanding. The contrast was stark. While they sought to control and mold him, she had only ever wanted him to be true to himself. Alexander made his way to his study, closing the door behind him. The large room, usually his sanctuary, felt like a prison now. He poured himself a drink with shaking hands, but couldn't bring himself to take a sip. Instead, he sank into his leather chair, Sophia's letter still in his hand, and let the silence of the empty mansion envelop him. Sophia stood in the middle of her small studio apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the few belongings she'd brought from the mansion. Sunlight streamed through the single window, casting a warm glow on the worn wooden floors. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She unpacked slowly, each item bringing back memories of her time at the mansion. Her hands trembled as she placed her favorite coffee mug on the tiny kitchen counter. It was the one Alexander had given her after noticing she always used it during their morning conversations. "This is home now," she whispered to herself, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The apartment was barely bigger than her former quarters at the mansion, but somehow it felt more spacious. Maybe it was because here she could breathe freely without the weight of unspoken words and complicated feelings. She hung her few clothes in the closet, arranged her books on a small shelf she'd found at a second-hand store, and made up her bed with fresh sheets. The familiar tasks helped quiet her mind, though thoughts of Alexander kept creeping in. Meanwhile, across town in his massive mansion, Alexander paced the length of his study for the 100th time. The room that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a cage. Every corner held memories of Sophia. The armchair where she'd sit during their evening talks, the window seat where she'd pause while dusting to watch the birds in the garden. He couldn't focus on work. The papers on his desk remained untouched. His phone calls went unreturned. His family's demands echoed in his head, but for the first time, they seemed hollow and meaningless compared to the ache in his heart. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered, running his hands through his disheveled hair. The thought of marrying someone his family chose, of living the rest of his life according to their rules, made him feel physically ill. Back in her apartment, Sophia arranged a small vase of daisies on her windowsill, a small attempt to bring some life to the space. She'd found them at a street vendor's cart on her way home from job hunting. Home. The word felt strange when applied to this tiny space, but she was determined to make it work. She sat on her bed, pulling out her worn notebook. Writing had always helped her process her feelings, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, her mind kept drifting to Alexander's face, to the way his eyes would soften when they talked, to the gentle way he'd started looking at her before everything fell apart. In his mansion, Alexander stood at his window, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Sophia was building a new life without him. The thought was unbearable. He thought about her strength, her kindness, the way she'd seen past his walls and touched his heart. His hands clenched into fists. For years, he'd let fear rule his life, fear of his family's disapproval, fear of losing his inheritance, fear of being vulnerable. But now, standing in his empty mansion, he realized that the only thing he truly feared was losing Sophia forever. "Enough," he said firmly, turning from the window. He wouldn't let fear control him anymore. He wouldn't let his family dictate his happiness. He had to find her, had to tell her how he felt, had to make things right. He walked to his desk with purpose, pulling out paper and pen. It was time to make plans, to figure out how to find Sophia and break free from his family's control. For the first time in weeks, his mind was clear. He knew what he had to do. Alexander sat in his study, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had defined his life for so long. The antique desk, the expensive artwork, the rare first editions lining his shelves, none of it meant anything without Sophia. The emptiness of the mansion echoed the hollowness in his heart. He pulled out a photograph from his desk drawer, a candid shot of Sophia tending to the garden, her face lit up with joy as she worked among the flowers. One of the staff had taken it months ago, and he'd kept it hidden away, afraid to acknowledge what it meant to him. "I've been such a fool," he murmured, touching the image gently. All this time, he'd let fear control him, let his family's expectations shape his life. But Sophia had shown him what real happiness felt like, what it meant to be truly seen and accepted for who he was. Standing up, Alexander walked to his window and looked out at the sprawling grounds. The carefully manicured gardens and marble fountains suddenly seemed suffocating rather than impressive. His whole life had been about maintaining appearances, living up to his family's standards. But what had it gotten him? Loneliness, empty relationships, a heart full of regret. He thought about Sophia's tiny apartment, how she'd chosen freedom over comfort. She had more courage than he'd ever shown, and it was time he learned from her example. Walking to his closet, Alexander pulled out a simple duffel bag. He packed only what he truly needed: some clothes, personal documents, and a few cherished items. Looking at his expensive suits and designer shoes, he realized he didn't want any of it anymore. They were just symbols of the prison he'd built around himself. As he prepared to leave for his family's estate, Alexander's hands shook slightly, but his resolve was firm. He thought about all the times his family had manipulated him, used his inheritance as a weapon to control his choices. Not anymore. The drive to his family's estate felt different this time. Usually his stomach would be in knots, anxiety building with each mile. But today, a strange calm had settled over him. The decision he'd made lifted a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The estate loomed before him, a massive Victorian mansion that had always felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The butler opened the door with his usual emotionless efficiency, leading Alexander to the formal living room where his parents waited. His mother sat perfectly poised on an antique settee, while his father stood by the fireplace, drink in hand. The room was exactly as it had always been, carefully arranged, coldly perfect, utterly lifeless. "Alexander," his mother said, her voice carrying that familiar note of disapproval. "We assumed you'd finally come to your senses about this unfortunate situation." "I have," Alexander replied, standing tall. "But probably not in the way you're thinking." His father's expression darkened. "If this is about that housekeeper—" "Her name is Sophia," Alexander interrupted, surprising himself with the strength in his voice. "And yes, this is about her, but it's also about me." "Don't be ridiculous," his mother snapped. "You have responsibilities, expectations to meet. We've arranged everything with the Vandermeers. Their daughter would make a perfect match." "Perfect for the family name, you mean?" Alexander said. "Perfect for the business merger you've been planning, but not perfect for me." His father set his glass down with a sharp crack. "If you pursue this foolishness, you'll lose everything. Your inheritance, your position, your place in this family." Alexander looked around the room, at the wealth and privilege that had shaped his life, at the parents who had never really known him at all. "No," he said quietly. "I'll only lose the things that never really mattered. I'm choosing what's real. I'm choosing love." Chapter 18. Finding his way back. Alexander's heart pounded as he stood outside Sophia's modest apartment building. The peeling paint and worn brick were a far cry from his family's mansion, but somehow the place felt more welcoming than any luxury estate ever had. A window box filled with cheerful marigolds hung from one of the second-floor windows. He knew instantly it had to be hers. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the buzzer for apartment 2B. Each second of silence that followed felt like an eternity. Finally, her voice crackled through the speaker. "Yes?" Just that one word, spoken cautiously, made his heart ache. "Sophia, it's me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, can we talk?" The silence stretched so long he feared she wouldn't answer. Then the door buzzed, allowing him inside. Alexander climbed the narrow stairs, his designer shoes out of place on the worn steps. He found her waiting in her doorway, arms crossed protectively over her chest. She looked beautiful in simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, so different from the careful way she'd always presented herself at the mansion. "What are you doing here, Alexander?" she asked quietly. "I had to see you," he said. "I needed to tell you everything." She hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. Her apartment was small but bright, filled with second-hand furniture and potted plants. A half-finished painting sat on an easel by the window. He'd never known she was an artist. "I went to see my family today," he began, remaining standing as she perched on the edge of her worn sofa. "I told them I'm done. Done with their control, their manipulation, all of it." Sophia's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent. I've spent my whole life being who they wanted me to be, he continued, running a hand through his hair. Living in fear of losing their approval, their money, their legacy. But when you left, I realized I'd already lost the only thing that really mattered. Alexander, she started, but he held up his hand. Please, let me finish. I love you, Sophia, not because you're safe or practical or good for the family name. I love you because you see me. Really see me. You made me want to be brave enough to live my own life. He took a step closer, his voice thick with emotion. I know I hurt you. I know I was a coward, but I've walked away from everything. The money, the mansion, all of it. I don't want that life anymore. I want a real life, with real love. With you. Sophia stood slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You really left it all behind? Yes, he said simply. And I've never felt more certain about anything. She wrapped her arms around herself, conflict clear on her face. I want to believe you, Alexander. But you pushed me away once before. How do I know you won't do it again when things get hard? Because I finally understand what matters, he said softly. My family offered me millions to stay, to marry their choice. But all that wealth felt worthless compared to one moment of real happiness with you. Sophia wiped at her eyes, clearly moved, but still hesitant. I need time, she said finally. It's a lot to process, but we can talk. Maybe start over? Alexander nodded, relief washing over him despite her uncertainty. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to prove to you that I've changed, that what we have is worth fighting for. Would you like some coffee? She asked after a moment, gesturing toward her tiny kitchen. We could talk more? I'd like that, he said softly, hope blooming in his chest for the first time in weeks. Alexander sat at Sophia's small kitchen table, wrapping his hands around a chipped coffee mug. The warmth seeped into his palms as he gathered his thoughts. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, catching dust motes in its golden beams. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he began, his voice soft but steady. About how I treated you, about the choices I made. I was wrong, Sophia. So terribly wrong. She sat across from him, her own mug untouched. Her eyes held a mixture of hope and caution that made his heart ache. All my life, I've let fear control me, he continued. Fear of disappointing my family, fear of losing everything I thought mattered. But when you left, his voice cracked slightly. When you left, I realized I'd already lost what truly mattered most. Sophia's fingers traced the rim of her mug. You hurt me, Alexander. I thought we had something real, something worth fighting for. But you chose your family's expectations over us. I know, he said, the pain evident in his voice. I was a coward. I let my insecurities and my family's manipulation cloud my judgment. But being alone in that empty mansion without you... He shook his head. It made me see everything clearly for the first time. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but leaving his own palm up in invitation. The way you looked at me, not as an heir or a fortune, but just as me, it changed something inside me. You made me want to be better, braver. Sophia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I never wanted your money or your status, Alexander. I just wanted you. I know that now, he said earnestly. I think I always knew it, deep down. That's what scared me the most, that someone could actually love me for who I am, not what I represent. He took a shaky breath. I promise you, Sophia, if you give me another chance, I'll spend every day proving to you that my love is real, that I'm ready to be the man you deserve. Standing up, Alexander moved around the table to kneel beside her chair. I was lost in the dark for so long, letting my family's expectations suffocate me. But you showed me what real love looks like, what real life could be. Sophia turned to face him, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. "How can I be sure you won't run again when things get difficult?" "Because I know now what matters most," he said, gently wiping away her tear. "I've lived without you, Sophia, and I never want to feel that emptiness again. I choose you, not out of obligation or fear, but because you make me whole." Sophia searched his eyes for a long moment, seeing the sincerity and love shining in them. Finally, her expression softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "I forgive you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she buried her face in his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long moment, their embrace saying more than words ever could. The afternoon sun wrapped around them, warming their reconciliation with its gentle light. As they held each other, both could feel the broken pieces of trust beginning to mend, their hearts beating in sync with the promise of a fresh start. The morning light filtered through the curtains of Sophia's small apartment as Alexander helped her fold the last of her clothes into a weathered suitcase. His own belongings, surprisingly few for someone of his status, sat packed in 2 modest bags by the door. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia asked, carefully placing a framed photo of her parents into the suitcase. "Leaving everything behind?" Alexander paused from wrapping a coffee mug in newspaper. His eyes met hers with unwavering certainty. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They had spent the past few days planning their departure. Alexander had quietly liquidated some personal assets and secured a small house in a coastal town several hours away. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was far from his family's reach and influence. "The realtor said we can pick up the keys tomorrow morning," he said, a hint of excitement creeping into his voice. "It's nothing like the mansion, but—" "It'll be ours," Sophia finished, smiling. She understood what that meant to him. A space that wasn't controlled by his family's expectations or weighed down by painful memories. They loaded Sophia's belongings into Alexander's least conspicuous car, a simple black sedan rather than one of his luxury vehicles. The trunk closed with a soft thud, and they drove to the mansion for one final stop. Walking through the grand halls of his family home, Alexander felt strangely detached. The expensive paintings and antique furniture that had once seemed so important now felt like props in someone else's life. "I used to think all this meant something," he murmured, running his hand along a mahogany table. "That somehow these things defined who I was." Sophia squeezed his hand. "They're just things, Alexander." In his study, he gathered the few items that truly mattered: his grandfather's pocket watch, some cherished books, and a small box of childhood photographs. Everything else, he decided, could stay behind. As they packed these last precious items, Alexander's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from his family. He silenced it without looking at them. They had already tried everything to stop him: threats, guilt, manipulation. But for the first time in his life, their words held no power over him. "Ready?" Sophia asked softly, standing in the doorway of his study. Alexander took one last look around the room where he'd spent countless hours trying to live up to his family's expectations. More than ready. They walked hand in hand through the mansion's grand entrance. Alexander paused only briefly to place his house keys and a letter of resignation from the family business on the entrance table. He'd already transferred control of his shares to a neutral trustee, ensuring his family couldn't use the company to track him down. The heavy front door closed behind them with a resounding click. Standing on the mansion's steps, Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The morning sun warmed his face, and a gentle breeze rustled through the manicured gardens. "It feels strange," he admitted, looking at Sophia. "Walking away from everything I've known." She squeezed his hand. "We're not walking away from everything. We're walking toward something better." Alexander smiled, truly smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. They got into the car, their few precious belongings secured in the trunk. As they drove through the mansion's gates for the last time, neither looked back. The city streets gradually gave way to open highway. Alexander reached over and took Sophia's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. The road ahead stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. The small cottage stood nestled against rocky cliffs, its weathered blue shutters and whitewashed walls a stark contrast to the mansion's imposing grandeur. Waves crashed rhythmically against the shore below, their sound drifting through the salty air. It was exactly the kind of place neither Alexander nor Sophia would have imagined calling home just months ago. "Well, this is it," Alexander said, fitting the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a cozy interior bathed in natural light from large windows facing the sea. Sophia stepped inside, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The living room was modest but charming, with built-in bookshelves and a stone fireplace. A few pieces of simple furniture the previous owners had left behind dotted the space. "It's perfect," she breathed, running her hand along a sun-warmed windowsill. Alexander watched her, his expression soft. "It needs some work," he admitted, noting the slightly peeling paint and squeaky floorboards. "But we can make it ours." They brought in their belongings from the car, making multiple trips up and down the gravel path. Each time they entered, the cottage felt more like home. Their few possessions gradually found their places. Sophia's books on the shelves, Alexander's grandfather's watch on the mantel, their clothes hanging together in the bedroom closet. In the kitchen, Sophia unpacked her collection of mismatched mugs, while Alexander struggled with a stubborn cabinet door. The normality of it all struck him. How natural it felt to be doing these simple tasks together. "I think this hinge is loose," he muttered, fiddling with the door. "I should be able to fix it, though I've never actually done anything like that before." Sophia smiled, remembering how servants had always handled such tasks at the mansion. "We'll learn together," she said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The afternoon light shifted, casting long shadows across the cottage floors. They moved to the bedroom, where Alexander helped Sophia make the bed with fresh linens. The mattress wasn't as luxurious as his old one, but somehow that made him happy. "Look what I found," Sophia said, pulling something from one of her boxes. It was the photograph she'd kept on her nightstand at her apartment, the one of her parents on their wedding day. She placed it carefully on the dresser. Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them looking at the happy couple in the photograph. "They look so in love," he observed. "They were," Sophia said softly. "They never had much money, but they were the happiest people I knew." The simple truth of her words settled over them. Here, in this modest cottage by the sea, they had everything they truly needed. No family pressures, no societal expectations, no walls between them, just the honest love they'd found in each other. They continued unpacking, working in comfortable silence broken only by the sound of waves and seabirds. Alexander hung his few cherished photos next to Sophia's on the wall, their memories mingling together like their lives. As the sun began to set, they found themselves back in the living room. Sophia was arranging flowers in a simple vase, while Alexander attempted to light a fire in the hearth. The warm glow finally caught, filling the room with soft light and the scent of burning wood. Standing together by the window, they watched the sky turn pink over the ocean. Alexander pulled Sophia close, pressing a kiss to her temple. In that quiet moment, surrounded by their merged belongings in their small cottage by the sea, they felt the pure joy of finally being exactly where they were meant to be. The morning sun streamed through the cottage windows, as Sophia struggled with their temperamental stove. After 3 attempts to light it, she let out a frustrated sigh. "I think we might need to get this fixed," she called out to Alexander, who was attempting to repair a leaking faucet in the bathroom. "Add it to the list," he replied, his voice muffled. A loud clang, followed by a muttered curse, made Sophia smile, despite her own challenges. She walked to the bathroom doorway, finding Alexander on his knees, surrounded by tools he barely knew how to use. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and a smudge of dirt marked his cheek. It was so different from his polished appearance at the mansion that she couldn't help but laugh. "Having fun?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up at her, a mix of frustration and determination in his eyes. "I never realized how much I didn't know about, well, everything." He set down the wrench he'd been holding incorrectly. "At the mansion, I just had to make a call, and someone would fix anything that broke." Sophia knelt beside him, picking up the wrench. "Here, let me show you. My dad taught me some basic plumbing." She guided his hands, showing him how to properly tighten the pipe fitting. Later that afternoon, they walked to the small town market to buy groceries. Alexander stared at the prices, mentally calculating their budget. It was something he'd never had to do before, and Sophia could see the worry lines forming on his forehead. "We'll figure it out," she assured him, selecting some vegetables from a local vendor. "I've lived on a tight budget my whole life. It's not as scary as it seems." Alexander nodded, but his expression remained troubled. I want to give you more than this. You deserve better than a broken-down cottage and discount groceries." Sophia stopped in the middle of the market, turning to face him. "Alexander, look around us." She gestured to the friendly vendors, the colorful produce, the ocean visible in the distance. "This is real. This is honest. I've never been happier." That evening, as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset, Sophia noticed Alexander was unusually quiet. "What's on your mind?" she asked, threading her fingers through his. He squeezed her hand gently. "My family's lawyer called today. They're proceeding with the disinheritance." His voice was steady, but she could hear the underlying pain. "It's really over." "Are you having second thoughts?" Sophia asked softly, her heart tightening with worry. Alexander turned to her, his eyes intense and clear. "No, not about us. Never about us." He pulled her closer. "But I worry that I'm not equipped for this life, that I'll fail at being the kind of partner you need. Everything is so different now." "Different doesn't mean worse," Sophia reminded him. "We're learning together. Yes, the stove doesn't work right. And yes, we're eating simpler meals. But we're free to be ourselves, to love each other without conditions or expectations." Alexander's tension seemed to ease at her words. "You're right," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "When I was surrounded by wealth and luxury, I was miserable and alone. Now I'm here, struggling to fix a leaky faucet, and I've never felt more fulfilled." "That's because you're not alone anymore," Sophia said, leaning into his embrace. "We face everything together now, both the good and the bad." The afternoon mail arrived with its usual assortment of bills and advertisements, but among them was a cream-colored envelope that made Alexander's hands tremble. The family crest was embossed in gold on the corner, a sight that brought back a flood of memories. "What is it?" Sophia asked, noticing his reaction as she watered the small herb garden they'd started on the windowsill. Alexander sat heavily in one of their second-hand kitchen chairs. "It's from my family." His voice was barely above a whisper. He stared at the envelope as if it might bite him. Sophia set down her watering can and pulled up a chair beside him. "You don't have to open it if you're not ready." He shook his head, breaking the seal with trembling fingers. As he read, His face grew increasingly pale. They're offering me everything back, he said, his voice hollow. The inheritance, my position in the family business, all of it. He looked up at Sophia, his eyes conflicted. If I agree to marry Victoria Preston. Sophia's heart clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. The woman they chose for you? Yes. Alexander stood up abruptly, pacing their small kitchen. They say it's not too late to correct my mistake. That's how they refer to our life together. A mistake. Anger crept into his voice. What are you thinking? Sophia asked quietly, watching him move back and forth. He stopped, running his hands through his hair. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't missed certain things. The security, knowing bills were always paid, not having to worry about broken appliances or... He trailed off, looking guilty. Sophia stood and approached him, taking his hands in hers. Alexander, listen to me. If you want to go back, I won't stop you. This has been a huge adjustment, and I understand if it's not what you want. He stared at her in disbelief. How can you say that? Because I love you, she said simply. And loving someone means wanting them to be happy, even if... She swallowed hard. Even if that happiness doesn't include you. Alexander's expression softened, and he pulled her into his arms. Do you know what I thought about this morning? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. What? I woke up before you and I watched you sleeping. Your hair was a mess, and you were wearing that old t-shirt with the hole in the sleeve. He smiled, touching her cheek. And I thought about how perfectly you fit in my arms, how peaceful you looked, how happy I am just being with you. He released her just long enough to pick up the letter from the table. With deliberate movements, he tore it in half, then quarters. I don't need their money or their approval. I don't want their chosen bride or their golden cage. He let the pieces fall into the trash. All I need is you, this life we're building together. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? More sure than I've ever been about anything, he said firmly. Yes, this life is harder in some ways. Yes, we struggle with things I never had to think about before, but I'm free here. I'm myself here. He kissed her softly. I'm loved here, not for my name or my wealth, but for who I am. Sophia wrapped her arms around him, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his steady heartbeat. I do love who you are, she whispered. Every part of you. Then I have everything I need, he said simply, holding her close in their small, imperfect kitchen, where they'd built a life filled with more riches than his family could ever understand. The morning sun streamed through the cottage windows, casting a warm glow across the breakfast table where Alexander and Sophia sat together. Their modest kitchen was filled with the aroma of coffee and fresh bread from the local bakery, a simple luxury they'd come to cherish. I can't believe it's been 3 months since we moved here, Sophia said, spreading jam on her toast. She watched Alexander across the table, noticing how the tension that used to live in his shoulders had melted away. Best decision I ever made, he replied, reaching across to take her hand. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. Though I have to admit, I never thought I'd become such an expert at fixing leaky faucets. Sophia laughed, remembering his first encounter with home maintenance. You've come a long way from the man who didn't know where to find the circuit breaker. I've had a good teacher, he said, his eyes soft with affection. You've taught me so much about living a real life, Sophia, not just existing in a gilded cage. Standing up, Sophia moved to the window, gazing out at their small garden. The roses she'd planted were beginning to bloom, adding splashes of color to their little piece of paradise. Alexander followed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. What should we do today? She asked, leaning back against his chest. "Actually, I have something planned," he said mysteriously. "Pack a lunch? I want to show you something." An hour later, they were walking hand in hand along a hidden trail that led to the cliff tops overlooking the sea. Alexander carried a picnic basket, while Sophia held a blanket. The ocean breeze tousled their hair, carrying the salty scent of freedom. "Here," Alexander said, stopping at a particularly beautiful spot. They spread the blanket on the grass and sat down. The vast expanse of blue stretched out before them. "It's beautiful," Sophia breathed, taking in the view. "I found this place last week when I was exploring," Alexander explained, unpacking their lunch, "and I thought it would be perfect for today." He pulled out 2 glasses and a bottle of sparkling cider. "I want to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" "Everything. Our freedom. Our love." He poured the cider and handed her a glass. "The fact that for the first time in my life, I'm truly happy." Sophia's eyes glistened with tears. "I never thought I could be this happy either," she admitted. "Sometimes I worry it's all a dream." "It's real," Alexander assured her, pulling her close. "Every morning when I wake up next to you, every time we share a meal or work in the garden or just sit together in comfortable silence, it's all wonderfully real." They shared their simple lunch, talking about their dreams for the future. Alexander spoke of starting his own small business, something he'd built himself rather than inherited. Sophia shared her hopes of expanding their garden, maybe even opening a small flower shop in town. "We can do anything we want now," Alexander said, his voice full of wonder. "No more expectations, no more pressure, just us making our own choices." Sophia squeezed his hand. "Together." They stood up, facing the endless horizon where sea met sky. The wind whipped around them, but they remained steady, anchored by their connection to each other. Alexander's arm slipped around Sophia's waist, pulling her close. "Look at that view," he murmured. "It reminds me of our future, wide open, full of possibilities." "And we'll face whatever comes our way as a team," Sophia added, leaning her head against his shoulder. They stood there, hand in hand, their hearts full of love and hope, knowing that they had found something rare and precious, true freedom and unconditional love.